North Italian Week to teach you how to make some traditional Italian pasta. I'm Laura and this is Daniela.
Ciao.
And I'm going to hand it over to you, Daniela. Tell us what to do.
Hi everyone, welcome to my kitchen. Laura and I are going to show you how to make some fresh pasta from scratch. I'm a personal chef and I specialize in dietary restrictions. So of course I'm Italian by design and everything is traditional, but I also usually offer a gluten-free and even a vegan option. So today this evening, I'm going to show you guys how to make a traditional pasta as well as a gluten-free pasta with eggs in it. And then this way, anyone who comes over to your house can enjoy pasta. And it's actually not as hard as you think. We'll be able to make the pasta from scratch in the short amount of time that we have together.
Can't wait.
So some of you received the recipes and instructions before we came live tonight. So in front of me, you should have some eggs, or if you're vegan, you should have some liquid from a can of chickpeas. You should also have some regular all-purpose flour in front of you, or if you happen to be gluten-free, you should have some gluten-free certified flour in front of you. Obviously, this gluten-free pasta won't be certified because it's right next to the real one, but we'll just pretend, okay? So in the recipe that I gave you guys, it calls for 400 grams of flour. I have my trusty little scale here, and I'm gonna measure out 400 grams of this gluten-free flour.
So
which is
the
about
first one that we're doing is the gluten-free pasta?
I think I'm gonna try to do them kind of at the same time to show you guys.
Okay, cool.
So it's about 2.5 cups. So I'm gonna make a little pile on my board here of the gluten-free pasta and put a little hole in the middle. During normal times, I wouldn't mix it all together because if you're gluten-free, but we're not gluten-free, so we're just gonna pretend. And I'm gonna do the same thing with the all-purpose flour. About 2.5 cups, 400 grams, and make a pile right next to that with a little hole in the middle. So you could do this in a bowl. You could do this in a food processor. If you had a KitchenAid mixer, you could put this in the bottom of your KitchenAid mixer with the paddle attachment, or you could just do it like by hand as I'm gonna do it. So tonight I'm gonna make the gluten-free pasta with the egg because it'll help hold that together. And I'm actually gonna make the non-gluten-free pasta vegan without the egg. So I asked you all to have 1 can of chickpea liquid. So I'm gonna start with the regular flour and I'm gonna add this. If you wanna use eggs, you're gonna crack your 4 eggs right into the middle here. I'm gonna pretend I'm cracking 4 eggs from my can of chickpeas into the middle of my thing here. Whoop. Then this is what happens. You kind of turn it into a dough. And I'm just showing you on a board here because obviously it's easier to see than if it was in a bowl, you wouldn't be able to see it.
And the chickpeas runnier than an egg, I guess.
The
chickpeas. You put the egg in.
Definitely, because when we make the other one, you guys will see that it won't run all over the board.
Just nice and tiny.
Yeah, exactly.
Never done it with chickpea flour or chickpea liquid. What do you call it?
I mean, chickpea liquid. But online they have that hashtag where they call it aquafaba, which is like a bean liquid.
Yeah.
So if you don't have chickpeas, you could technically use like a can of black beans or white beans. So as you see, it's really messy, but that's okay because right next to me, actually, Laura can help me. You pour a little tiny bit of water right in the middle here. That's good. And basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to work the flour and the water/egg all together until it becomes conducive. And as you see, I'm kind of pulling and pushing and pulling and pushing and pulling and pushing and kind of just getting everything together. So I have a sharp knife that I like to use. Some people use what they call a bench scraper or like a piece of plastic that they scrape with, but I like to use a sharp knife and it just helps me kind of keep all my stuff.
Contain all the parts.
Contain all the parts together, exactly. And so your dough has to be a little bit moist. But as you see, it kind of just really starts coming together on its own. And you just kind of keep going and keep going and keep going until, so see how it's kind of rough and you've got all these bubbles and little lumps and stuff? we just want to keep going because eventually all these little lumps will start kind of melding together and it'll turn into a really nice smooth dough. I can see it's sticky still a little bit, so I'm going to take a little bit of the flour. This is the non-gluten-free flour, and just work it in there so that it's not too sticky when we're trying to shape the pasta later.
And how tough is the dough?
The dough is actually really tough.
Yeah.
Is
that because of the chickpea, or is that just in general?
This is actually what happens with
Pasta dough?
gluten pasta. So when we work on the gluten-free one, you'll notice that the gluten-free flour will act really different. That's kind of why I wanted to use the real flour first, because whether you're using the chickpea liquid right now or you're using eggs right now,
It's tough.
it will still kind of be the same
Interesting.
and be tough. But what you'll notice is we're going to allow this to rest in a few minutes. And as it's resting, the gluten will kind of work its way and it will actually smooth out and become much softer when we go to make the actual pasta. So,
this is just all-purpose flour, right?
yep, just regular all-purpose.
What's the difference between all-purpose flour and like a double O flour?
So double O flour will just create a softer texture. I love to use double O flour. I just don't have any right now, but I figure most people at home have all-purpose. The double O flour will give a softer texture, a smoother texture, and it'll actually soak up more liquid. So it might be a little bit more spongy than if you use the all-purpose flour. So see how this is all coming together, and it's no longer sticky. And as I'm going on the board, it's kind of like cleaning up all the extra spots.
We love that.
That's when I know it's kind of ready.
Okay.
So what I like to do is kind of just form it in a bowl. And I'll put it to the side. And I'll put a mapine. What's funny is my nonna doesn't speak English, so I grew up learning English and Italian at the same time. And so there's some words that when I'm thinking about speaking in English, I don't even know what they are. So what is this called in English?
Oh, I don't know. A tea towel?
A tea towel, but in Italian we call it a mapine, so that's what I call it. It's so funny. So obviously if you were celiac or you had an allergy to gluten, you would not pull your gluten-free flour over the board on top of the regular flour. But we're just gonna pretend that this is a clean board, and I'm gonna pull my gluten-free flour into the middle here. I'm gonna use the same knife just because we're live and we are limited for time. But obviously, if you were making a gluten-free pasta for a guest, I would suggest you make it completely separate from your regular stuff because you just want to make sure that they don't have any cross-contamination in there.
Lydia is wondering if we can explain a bit more the way to massage the dough when we get to the next one.
Absolutely, absolutely. So this one is the gluten-free flour. And I have these beautiful farm fresh eggs here. I had to show the little blue one because he's so beautiful. And I'm just gonna crack these eggs right into the center of my gluten-free flour, sorry. The gluten-free flour that I'm using is like an all-purpose 1-for-1 in the way that it's like a pre-mix that you buy that is for gluten-free. Whereas I wouldn't suggest using a one type gluten-free flour. Like I wouldn't buy just rice flour or just potato flour or just, corn flour because it doesn't have the binders in it that the mix would have. And because there's no gluten in it like a regular pasta, those singular flours won't really hold together and they won't give that texture that we're used to in real pasta. So these are really big eggs. So I told you guys to use 4 eggs, but these are like super extra large from really big chickens. So I'm only gonna use 3. If your dough is a little bit liquidy, of course we add more flour. And if your dough is dry, that's why I have this little bit of water here next to me.
Jody has a good question here.
Absolutely.
Does the local humidity affect how much water or flour you need to get a smooth dough?
Yes, absolutely. But it doesn't really affect to get a smooth dough. It just means that while you're doing it, you have to kind of feel it. kind of when I was showing you how when the dough was starting to pull away from the board and it wasn't sticky anymore, that's the texture you're going for, in the way that if you happen to live somewhere that's more humid, you're definitely going to need more flour because it's going to soak up more moisture. And then if you live in somewhere that's a little bit more dry, or it's a time of year that's a little bit more dry, that's when you might need, like if I made this right now, maybe I wouldn't need to use water, but in the middle of winter here in Ottawa, when it's like not humid at all, I might make the exact same amount, but need a little bit of water. Yeah. So as you see with this guy, the eggs aren't as liquid-y as the chickpea liquid. So what I like to do is I actually like to poke each one of the yolks and kind of stir it inside the well. And eggs is much easier. So if you do eat eggs, it is definitely much easier to make pasta with eggs. But again, as you saw, not impossible. So this guy doesn't make as much of a mess around. But same thing. So the gluten-free flour isn't going to act exactly the same as the last one, but the motions are kind of the same. These are big eggs. There we go. All right. So I'm kind of doing the same thing where I'm pulling and pushing and pulling and pushing and pulling and pushing. And look at that. That's really dry. I think I can actually add that fourth egg. You can always follow a recipe that you find online for pasta, but my Nonna never had a recipe, and I don't like to use an exact recipe just because, as you see, and as we were asked the question about humidity, it's going to be different. It's not like a cookie where you're mixing you know, the fat with the sugar and it's the same every time. This is something that's just a little bit more nuanced, kind of like a pizza dough where one time you make it exactly the same as last time, but it's totally different, right? So the gluten-free dough is a little bit harder, but it doesn't need to rest as long. So that's why I decided to do the other one first, because with gluten-free flour and gluten-free dough, as soon as it comes together, it's ready, you can use it. But with gluten, you want it to rest a little bit so that it can kind of become smooth. I guess there's a like a science chemical reaction happening with the water and the gluten that kind of helps it become soft. All right, so as you see, it's starting to come together. And the question that Lydia had about what I'm doing is I'm kind of just looking for all of the stuff on the board to come together. So I have a lot of dry pieces here. So would you mind pouring a little bit of water just kind of in the middle here? Sure. Yep, that's great. Perfect. And then we just want to do the same thing. And as you can see, look at it's like really sticky. It's never going to be as dry as the real gluten, and it's not going to be as tough. As you can see, this one's kind of like mushier and a little bit like easier to slide in my hands. So this is the gluten-free flour. I'm just going to do this so that I can get all of that.
All those bits?
All those little bits. Have you ever made fresh pasta before?
I think I have. I don't think I ever made fresh pasta with my nonna, but I do remember being very little and making bread with her.
Oh, that's lovely.
Make a stand and do the push and the pull.
The push and the pull, yeah, exactly. The push and the pull. Yeah. So this guy, as you see now, is not really sticky anymore. Okay. He's starting to pick up the little bits on the boards below. Just for time, I'm going to pretend this isn't here. I'm going to clean that up in a moment. But if you had more time, you would just keep adding water to the remnants here and just keep going and keep going and keep going until everything was included and clean on your board. So I have a little induction burner here. I've got a pot of boiling water starting to boil. You guys at home, if you're cooking along with me, now would be a great time to fill your pot with water and put it on the stove to get it boiling, because this pasta dough will be ready to start forming in probably about 5 minutes. So I've got my regular dough here and my gluten-free dough here, and I'm just gonna cover them both up. So, do we have any questions or anything going on?
Let's take a look.
Just while I clean up.
Not too much. I think you've answered them so far.
Love it.
What's your favorite thing to cook gluten-free? Do you feel like there are a lot of things that people can't eat gluten-free that you can give them gluten-free?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm probably most famous for my gluten-free gnocchi. It's something that I love to do, and my gluten-free gnocchi actually is also vegan because I don't use eggs in it, so it's just like boiled potato with a gluten-free flour, and I've served it at events before, and people don't know.
No?
They really don't know that it's gluten-free.
That's the goal.
And then I do a focaccia bread, a little flat bread that is gluten-free, and people can't tell. But the trick to that is using a lot of yeast so that it grows extra, because the difference between gluten-free stuff and regular stuff is that gluten-free is much denser, so it doesn't rise as much. So I use like extra yeast and let it ferment for a really long time to give it that nice rise.
What about whole wheat flour? What would you do with whole wheat flour?
Actually, we use whole wheat flour at my Nona's house in the past to make pasta many times, but we kind of cut it half and half, because the whole wheat flour usually is much heavier and it doesn't have the same smooth texture that the white one does. So she'll usually do half and half to kind of like up the nutrition, but then still get the smoothness from the white flour.
Smart.
That's what she does with her bread as well. So when you're making homemade bread, you can always like add in some healthy flour, like, you know, if let's say your recipe calls for 4 cups of flour, you could do like 1 cup whole wheat or 1 cup buckwheat or something with a little bit more nutrition in it, if that's something that you care about.
Super cool.
What's really cool actually is my Nono told me once that back in Italy, in the mountains of Calabria where they grew up, there wasn't white flour.
Oh,
Right? Like there wasn't such thing as white flour. So, and there also wasn't such thing as yeast. Like you didn't just go to the store and get yeast. You went to your neighbor's house to get a piece of their sourdough starter to make your bread. And then like everyone would like grow their own wheat, and then they would go down to the bottom of the mountain and get it milled. And so there was no like bleaching. Do you know what I mean? So it was all whole wheat.
That's great.
So that's really cool. So I'm going to put these to the side. And I'm going to give my hands a really quick wash. And while I do that, Laura is going to be here for 1 moment.
Happy to be. There's a story, I think, from a Malcolm Gladwell book about a town in Italy that, I think it was a town in Italy or a town in America that had a lot of Italian immigrants. And there was not a lot of, like just an uncharacteristic amount of a lack of sickness in that town.
Yeah.
And they cited the thing, or like the reason that people weren't having cancer and no heart attacks and this, that, and the other thing was because there was such a great sense of community that had carried over from Italy in this town. I think it was in like Pennsylvania or something like that.
That's so cool.
Yeah, and so they would share the yeast, and they would, if somebody didn't have any food on their table, somebody would quietly go and put some food at their door, just like lovely little things like that. And that the entire town, by virtue of this, had significantly less.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
that's something that we don't really have anymore. But yeah, I mean, I got to visit Italy in 2013 with my Nonna, and I got to go into the mountains where she grew up, and all the neighbors know each other. And even like she's in Canada now, but like she has her little phone with the 12 programmed Italian numbers and still calling everyone in Italy. Community is such a big thing in Italian culture that I think, you know, sometimes in Canadian culture we might lose a little bit. So yeah, it's really cool. Something else about that that's interesting is that when it comes to sicknesses and stuff, we come to Canada and we think that like, oh, this recipe is exactly the same that we had in Italy. I don't know why, you know, some people have gluten intolerance or some people get diabetes or what have you. But what's interesting is like, yeah, the recipe's the same, but like you didn't grow the wheat yourself. You got it at Costco. Or like, my Nonna, what she did when she was young is she would pick olives. That was her job. They would go into olive fields all summer and they would pick olives, and then in exchange they would get paid a little bit, but then also a third of the olives that they picked they would turn into oil, and then their family would have olive oil for the year. And so like the olive oil that they used then was like picked and made versus the olive oil that we buy now
Which
isn't
is not the
necessarily the same, right?
Yeah.
So, all right,
Lovely.
so let's touch these. See how much softer it is and less hard it is? It's really bouncy now, and it's become really smooth. You don't see those lumps
Goes
or
so
anything
fast.
like that, right?
Yeah.
That was probably like 10 minutes. Okay, so that's the real gluten dough. And then the gluten-free dough is the same. It hasn't changed, and it doesn't change. It acts exactly the same.
Oh.
So just for TV purposes or live camera purposes, I'm not gonna make the full one of this and the full one of this.
Okay.
We're gonna
Cut it.
We're gonna cut it, and we're each gonna make one.
Oh.
Okay.
Whew, okay.
You can do it. You can do it.
Ready.
So I'm just gonna turn up my water a little bit because it's not hot enough to get boiling, and we really want it to get boiling. And something that we do always is salt the water when we make pasta. So we don't put the seasoning in the dough. We put the seasoning in the water, and then the water will season it for us. Okay?
Jody is wondering if you can add pureed vegetables to pasta dough.
Absolutely. So when you have the eggs in the middle of your little pile, or you have your chickpea liquid in the middle of the pile,
Yeah.
that's when you would add your vegetable puree.
And that's how you get the green pasta? And the
Yeah.
different-
So you could like take a little handful of spinach, and you could throw it in your little blender and strain it. I don't, like when I make colored pastas, I like to strain the vegetables so that I'm not getting like chunks of the
much.
vegetables throughout the dough. I like to strain it, so I'm just using like the spinach juice or the red pepper juice or what have you, and then yeah, it can color your dough.
Cool.
A lot of fun. Okay, so I'm gonna take a piece of the gluten-free dough, and she's gonna take a piece of the regular dough. We'll put them to the side.
Okay.
So everyone's gonna be working with a piece of dough that's about this size. This is enough to feed 4 people or 2 really hungry people. And so it probably is enough to make like 4 or 5 little strings. Of course, I have a pasta machine, and I'm sure many of you have seen one. You've got that machine that you use your hand and
Yeah.
you roll it out. Or I have a rolling pin here just to show you that, sure, I can roll it out. But no, I'm gonna show you guys the way that our nonas or my
Handmade?
nona makes what we call fusilli, but actually like here in Canada, fusilli is those ones that are all turny. But when I was growing up, fusilli was these guys. So you get your dough there and kind of do the same thing. And this is also kind of how I make my gnocchi in the same way, but instead of running it on a fork, which I'll show you guys in a minute, I keep them like little pillows. So I have a fork here with me. So if any of you guys are cooking along with us at the same time, grab a fork from your drawer and have it ready. So I got one for you and one for me.
Okay.
That dough is going to be much harder to roll out because the gluten stretches back and forth and it really gives you resistance. Whereas the gluten-free dough doesn't change and it doesn't really have any kind of bounciness to it. So it's much easier to roll out. So
I'll just keep rolling it.
just
like
keep
this.
rolling. Here, let me see. She's good, she's good. Just gotta be more aggressive. Don't be shy, you gotta be really aggressive.
Gotta be a little bit more Italian with my dough. Yeah.
Okay, perfect, perfect. So what I like to do at this point is cut them into little things like this.
They look like little gnocchis now.
They kind of do look like little gnocchis. And so when I'm making gnocchi, this would be kind of the end piece. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
Like these would be the little things that you throw in the water.
Okay.
But just for more fun, my favorite thing to do and what my nona used to do is you take your little piece of dough. You've got your regular gluten, I've got my gluten-free. You take your fork, you hold it in your finger, and you go like that. Yeah, you got it. That's it. That's it. Beautiful. And then you put it to the side.
Okay.
So we're just going to quickly do all of our little things. And obviously the more you do, the faster you get. But there is no...
Are you calling me slow?
No. There is no mistakes. Some of mine are a little bit smaller than the others. If I was working in a restaurant, I wouldn't want that, but I'm trying to make a very authentic and traditional rustic pasta dish tonight. Look at those, they're so pretty. And our water's starting to boil, so actually kind of like perfect timing.
Oh, baby.
So I think what we're gonna do is we'll drop yours into the water first,
sure.
and then we'll scoop them out with a little strainer and put them to the side. And then we'll do that with these as well, and then we can kind of make them separate so we can taste them separately.
Cool.
So of course, pasta is traditionally served with marinara, and we have marinara, but tonight I thought it would be much more fun and also authentic to just do an olive oil with garlic and some fresh basil or some chili flakes, because then we can actually taste the pasta and the texture of the pasta.
Cool.
And then of course, if you have a jar of marinara around, you can open it up and you can use that too.
Like your Etal Foods jar from your festival box.
Absolutely, absolutely. So these are so pretty. Good job. Yay. Okay, awesome. So these are ready, and we're just gonna drop them in.
Cool.
So what's gonna happen is, I just like to turn the water a little bit because it gets the water moving and it allows them to like not stick together. We're actually just waiting for them to pop up. So what's really neat about fresh pasta, unlike pasta that you buy at the store, it's dry and you have to like wait 9 to 11 minutes and kind of whatever. But with fresh pasta, it just floats. And as soon as it's floating, you know it's ready, which is really, really cool. I think I'm gonna grab my little strainer so we can scoop that out.
Yeah.
You could make this in advance, or you could spend a month, you could spend an afternoon, making pasta for a month. That's what I meant to say. Where you make a big, you make a big batch of dough like this, and you can freeze these. When I freeze pasta like this, what I like to do is I put them out on a cookie sheet like this, so they're not touching each other. And then I put that cookie sheet in the oven, in the freezer. And then when they're frozen, I put them in a Ziploc bag. And then that way they don't freeze sticking together. But another thing that you can do is if you have a dehydrator, you could dehydrate them and then you have your own dry pasta. Or you can leave them on the counter like my nonna used to and cover them in a mapine for like 8 hours, and then when you come back, they're kind of dry, and you can just throw them in a Ziploc bag. They don't stick together, and you keep them in the fridge and use them within the week, or you throw them in the freezer and have them for a month. Look at that. Look at that. Look at that. So they've popped up. They've popped up lovely, super, super nice. So we've got our regular gluten little pasta nudes here, and
these are the ones that we made with the chickpea egg.
Yeah, so these have no egg in them.
Cool.
And then now we're gonna drop the gluten-free ones. And they're gonna do the same thing. Even though they have, I don't know how the world invented gluten-free to do that or what the science rules are, but somehow gluten-free stuff also floats to the top, which is great. So
the egg-free for Thai.
So we have the gluten-free pasta going and this going. I just don't want it to stick together, and if we weren't doing a live show right now, you would take your sauce and you would pour it on and you would mix it together.
Right.
But because we're gonna,
Separate.
I'm just gonna put a tiny little bit of olive oil over here so that they don't stick together while we're waiting for the sauce. Love it. And the gluten-free pasta is even faster because, my goodness, it's already popped up. Look at that. Okay. So I'm going to get rid of this pot. Any questions going on?
Rita wants to know how thin you should roll it before you cut it.
Okay, so mine is like a drumstick, maybe like the thickness of a drumstick, but it's up to you, girl. It's really up to you. You can make it even skinnier, and you can make them little tiny pastas, or you can make it fatter and you can make yourself little big dumplings. It's kind of up to you.
Cute.
Sometimes if you have the time and you want to experiment, you could take a rolling pin or a can of tomatoes or a bottle of passata, and you could use that as your rolling pin. And you could roll your pasta out and then cut it into little strips and make yourself like fettuccine or something like that. But yeah.
Cute.
Okay, so next we're gonna switch spots in a second, but I'm just gonna grab a frying pan right here.
Guys, if you have any questions.
Now is the time. Now is the time. So I have some fresh garlic here. I'm going to get myself a few cloves of fresh garlic. I don't need that guy anymore either. And you could smash your garlic with your knife and chop it up and take the time to do that. But what I love to do is I love to save myself time and energy, and I like to grate my garlic into the pan. Nona probably didn't do that.
It's a good trick.
But it's a great trick. So I've got garlic ready to go, and we're gonna switch spots.
Okay.
Switch. So what's also really cool about these doughs, if you make a big batch at once, you can actually freeze the dough just like this. So you can have frozen dough in the freezer, and then in the morning before you go to work, you take it out of the freezer and throw it in the fridge, and then when you come home from work, it's defrosted. And all you have to do is spend 15 minutes making some, and it's really fast. A lot of people think that making fresh pasta is like a whole day situation, and it is. If you're gonna make like ravioli or tortellini or something like that.
More complicated.
But this kind of stuff is
Pretty
pretty straightforward, yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So I'm gonna turn on my burner to probably, oh, is this giving me trouble? I have an induction burner and not all my pans work on the induction, but this one does for sure, so yes. So, why isn't it working? There we go. Okay, so I'm gonna turn my pan on to probably medium high, and I'm going to get a bunch of olive oil in here. Now, you probably know this, we use more olive oil than people think they should use. You wanna put that much in, but we're gonna put that much in. You can never have too much olive oil.
I agree
It's
with
good
that
for your skin,
Good for
you know, it's
everything.
good for everything, it's good for your heart, all that kind of stuff.
Good for your soul.
Yeah, all those things. So I'm just gonna let my pan get nice and warm, and I'm gonna wait for the heat to kind of get hot. All of you at home, you can be continuing to roll your pasta out. You can boil it after. You can eat along with us this one little portion, and then when we get off the live video, you guys can like freeze your dough, or you can continue making it. I'm gonna wrap one of these up and save it for another day, but later on I'm actually going to roll it all up and we'll cook it all up so that we can eat some of it.
Fun.
Yeah. So that's nice and hot.
I think Tanya wants to know if the recipe will be available. Yes, it will be, Tanya.
Absolutely.
Send us a DM.
Yes, and we have a full recipe, and if you want a recipe for this part though, we don't really have one, so get a pen and paper out right now. So we got some oil in the pan, it's nice and hot. I can feel that the pan is nice and hot. Then I'm gonna take my fresh garlic clove and grate it in. And I can hear that sizzle. That's one of my favorite sounds. You guys hear that? This is a time where if you love, or it's the middle of summer and you have lots of green onions or a little red onion, or you want to add some fresh chives or parsley, now would be a great time, because I'm actually not looking to like brown the garlic too much. I just kind of want to caramelize it a little bit. So I'm using 3 garlic cloves, but you can never have enough garlic, so you could use 5 if you want to, or you could use just 1 if you don't want it super garlicky. And if you don't have any fresh garlic at home, I mean, it's not as good, but you can get away with using garlic powder or like granulated garlic as well. So my garlic is nice and toasty. It's a tiny little bit brown, but not really that much. And then the reason I didn't empty the pot earlier for the water that we use to cook the pasta is because I'm actually gonna steal a tiny little bit of water from the pot. This water has a lot of starch in it from cooking the pasta. And what's great about that, it'll give a little bit of body to our sauce, and it will also help the sauce stick to the pasta. So I'm gonna add a little bit of that in there. It's not that much. And I'm just gonna let this simmer down for a couple minutes while we check out if we have any questions or let you guys finish what you're doing.
Let's see, what do they say? The more garlic, the better, from Sonia.
Absolutely, the more garlic, the better. I mean, if you have one of those Costco garlic things, just put your spoon in and take a big scoop and throw it in the frying pan. You can never have too much garlic.
Jody
Okay.
says that pasta water is the tears of the gods. That's actually, Jody, I always, to see how authentic an Italian is, wonder or watch how they make their pasta, make their sauce, if they put any
Yes, or if
pasta water in.
if they like, I don't know, some North Americans do this. They put the pasta like this in the bowl and then they just put the sauce on top without mixing it with the sauce. That's not real Italian, people. It's not real Italian. So I just let this reduce a little bit because I didn't really measure the water and there's a little bit too much in there, but that's okay.
That's all right.
Are you a spicy girl? You like a little bit of
Yeah,
spice?
I like a little bit of spice.
Okay, so I have these little chili flakes. I'm gonna use chili flakes, but if you have an Italian nonna, maybe you have some pickled hot peppers in your fridge, or maybe you have some jalapenos, or you don't like spice at all and you just wanna use some bell peppers. That would be the time to add that. So I like spice, so I'm gonna add a little bit extra. Okay, and then I'm going to add the regular pasta in.
Okay.
And because we're doing two separate ones, I made enough sauce for both. So I'm gonna stir this, take it out, and then put the other one in.
Smart.
But it like coats the outside. And I always like to turn even if you're using pasta from the grocery store, when you're adding the sauce in, I love to put it back into the pan and turn the pan on high because it helps the sauce kind of bubble and it helps the pasta absorb it more, so your pasta's getting more flavor.
Oh.
And that's kind of, sometimes people will cook their pasta to al dente or very al dente, so that then when they add it back into the pan with the sauce,
They can leave it longer. So
yeah, and it's continuing to cook and continuing to kind of soak up all that
moisture and
flavor.
Yeah.
So these guys, okay.
I can't smell the garlic on the live stream, but I can smell the garlic.
And then of course, I made enough for both, so now I'm gonna add the gluten-free ones in there. Oh, and this turned off because I took the pot off for too long. And we're gonna let this bubble. Okay, now we'll switch spots.
Okay.
We'll switch back. Perfect. So I have fresh basil here because it's that perfect time of year when everyone's planted their garden. They have little tiny things of basil. You could use basil, you could use parsley, you could leave it out altogether. If you're dairy-free, you don't have to use cheese. You can purchase dairy-free cheeses, or you can buy something called nutritional yeast, which really gives like a nice Parmesan-y flavor without actually using Parmesan. And if you actually like dairy, now would be a time where you could even put in a little splash of cream. Or a little splash of heavy, or if you're English, like clotted cream, or even like a scoop of ricotta or a scoop of mascarpone would be a great time to add that in, and then you can create a creamy sauce for yourself.
Would you put cacio in now if you were doing a cacio pepe?
Yes, absolutely. And that reminds me, let me just salt it again.
Ooh.
So I have a little block of parm here. And you guys can use whatever cheese you have at home, but of course, traditionally, Parmigiano Reggiano is the way to go. So I don't mind if my cheese tastes like garlic or if my garlic tastes like cheese. So we're just gonna use the same one. And I'm going to top that. And then I'm gonna show you another way. So this is hot in the pan, and here you have the cheese kind of on top and melty. But what is great is if you turn your pan on really low, so like medium low or low at the end, and you grate your cheese right into the pan, it'll melt into the sauce. And then it kind of gives it a little bit of more of like a creamy texture. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
melts right in.
Lydia wants to know a common mistake made by someone making pasta dough. So somebody's doing this for the first time.
Yeah.
What's something that they might do wrong?
That's wrong, is make their dough too dry.
Oh, okay.
So when I was talking about how when we're kneading and we want it to kind of just come off the board,
Yeah.
and you touch it, it's not sticky. Some
Yeah.
people will add too much flour, or they really flour their board too much and they keep going. And another mistake kind of on that same playing field or whatever is when you're rolling the pasta dough out, adding too much flour to the board.
Okay.
Because then your water becomes murky and full of flour.
Yeah.
And also then sometimes your pasta can become too tough.
And is that, how do you overroll your dough? Is that a thing? Like over knead it maybe?
You
Can
can
you
over knead it. I don't really think you can over knead it if the ingredients are right. Like if I just kept kneading this guy, I don't think anything would happen. But if I kept adding flour to the board and kept kneading flour into it, more flour into it,
get tough.
it's gonna get super dry and then get cracked. And then when you put it on the board to rest and you go to roll it, it's gonna like crumble and fall apart. You know?
We don't want that.
We don't want that. Look at that though, like the cheese kind of like turned into, like it melted. And now the sauce on this side is a little bit thicker than the other one.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. This is really oily. Obviously a real aglio e olio wouldn't have as much liquid in the pan, but we are live and doing it for the first time in front of you. So
There's more oil in it than usual.
more oil, more garlic, but you can't go wrong. And you know what? For things like that, I always have some of my Nona's handmade bread, the one that we were talking about.
Earlier,
And
yes.
so even though there's too much oil in the pan here,
We can problem solve
we
this.
can, here, let's do that.
Okay.
You do that one, I'll do this one. Can't have too much oil for bread dipping.
This is what I had
Oh,
for
it's
dinner
so
last
delicious.
night.
It's so delicious.
Bread and olive oil.
That's the best kind of meal. That's delicious. And if you're in the middle of the season or at the end of the season, the basils are really big. Or if you bought basil at the grocery store, it's really big.
Leaves are huge.
And in that case, I would take the basil and I would line them up. And then I would roll them up into a little circle. And then I would slice them to make little basil
Cute tricks.
strings. But because they're small, I think they're very pretty. So I like to just
Break them up a little bit.
break them up a little bit and put them on top. But yeah, look at that.
Yum. The basil smells amazing now.
The basil, honestly, I used to say when I was a kid, if you could get a perfume that smells like basil, I would wear that all the time. And some people wear peach scent and some people wear like rose scent.
Yeah.
I would be all about the basil
Basil
scent.
perfume.
Absolutely. So we've made this lovely pasta. We have this lovely dough left over. Obviously, we've gone a little bit fast if you're making dinner for 4. So, of course, take this with a grain of salt and understand that after we don't see you guys anymore, we're going to turn this into pasta and we're not going to waste any of this. But you cannot have pasta or fresh basil or garlic or any of these things without a glass of red wine. So I thought that I would get a bottle of Lupi, which is one of my favorite Italian affordable wines here at the LCBO in Ontario. And
It's an organic red wine too?
it's an organic
That's
wine.
great.
I really try to, if you ever come to one of my events, I really try to focus on organic, not only in the food that I make, but also in the alcohol that I serve. Not only is it more traditional of a wine, so, 200 years ago, there was no such thing as not organic. Everything was organic. And so the wine that you buy that's organic is typically more traditionally done. But what else is great about organic wine is it doesn't have added sulfites, so we don't get as much of a hangover.
We love that for me.
We love that. We love that. So I'm just gonna pour us a little glass so that when we take our fork and we try our pasta, we can, is it pasta? Is it pasta? Tomato? What do you guys say?
I think I say pasta, but
Pasta?
I'm pretty fake Italian, so I don't know.
What's-
I got in trouble for saying no and nonna, and the Italians told me that I had to say no, so
Yeah,
I don't
nonno.
pronounce my 2 N's properly.
No. And then everyone calls their nonna, but we call her nana.
Oh,
Yeah. Na, hey, na. Anyway, so cheers to a little glass of red wine.
Thanks for having us.
Delicious. Okay, so I'm gonna grab the gluten-free and you're gonna grab the regular.
Okay.
And we're just gonna use the same forks that we use to form the pasta. And we're gonna have a bite.
And you have the melted cheese in your sauce, and I have the cheese on top.
You have cheese on top.
I'm really grateful.
I can taste the garlic. I can taste the chili. I can taste the basil. What's different about the gluten-free?
I want to try yours actually,
Okay, we'll switch.
because mine is chewy.
Whatever. I mean, we all have Italian germs here, so it's okay. This one is not as chewy. It definitely doesn't taste like real traditional pasta because it is gluten-free, but it is still pretty darn good for gluten-free. And you can't tell this doesn't have egg in it.
No. So
It's
this
got
one,
that-
I would say the only difference is that it's like more crumbly in my mouth. This one's more of a like a gnocchi or a pasta with the chew. Yeah.
So the real gluten has like a give, like the dough.
Yeah, exactly.
It kind of like, see, when I push on the dough, it pops kind of back. Whereas the gluten-free dough, when you push on it, there's no pop back.
Yeah.
So the same kind of texture in your mouth, where the regular pasta gives you that gumminess and this doesn't. But for someone who doesn't eat gluten or hasn't had gluten or is allergic to it, this is pretty darn good. This one you can tell a little bit of a difference. But again, like I was saying earlier, if you make gnocchi with it, because of the potato and the softness of the potato, you can't tell. If any of you want my gnocchi recipe, just reach out to me on social or what have you. My business is Mmm Chef, and I'm happy to share any tips or tricks or even clarify anything that we talked about here tonight, or how to make the gnocchi or what have you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having us.
Oh my gosh, it was
been
such a
great.
pleasure. Really, really.
Cheers. Happy Italian week, guys.
Ciao, everybody. Buonasera.